Hello, readers. Welcome back to Reading in the Middle, the podcast where we celebrate middle grade books that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us how powerful stories can be. I'm your host, Anisha Jeffries, and today's episode explores a book that feels incredibly timely, deeply personal, and honestly necessary for the moment we're living in. Today, I'm joined by illustrator Danica Novgorodoff and Mira Subramanian, the creative team behind the book, the graphic novel, A Better World is Possible. Danica Novgorodov is an artist, writer, and New York Times bestselling illustrator whose books include Long Way Down with Jason Reynolds, The Undertaking of Lily Chen, Slow Storm, and Tsunami, a memoir of art and motherhood. In 2022, she was awarded the Yoto Kite Green Away Medal, one of the highest honors in children's book illustration. Mira Subramanian is an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, The New Yorker, Nature, and other publications. She writes narrative nonfiction focused on climate change, the environment, and our relationship to the natural world. Her first book, A River Runs Again, India's Natural World in Crisis, was shortlisted for the Orion Book Award. Together, they've created a remarkable graphic nonfiction book that blends journalism, climate science, activism, and personal storytelling through the experiences of 4 young climate activists in New York City, preparing for one of the world's largest climate protests. You know, what makes this book especially powerful is that it explores not only the science behind climate change, but also the emotional realities young people face when thinking about the future of the planet. The book tackles themes of environmental justice, community inequality, and hope, reminding readers that climate change is not just about science, it's about people and the choice that we make together. Also, what stood out while reading this book is that although it explores the realities of climate change, it never loses sight of hope, community, and the power of young people to create meaningful change. In our conversation, we'll talk about their collaborative process, the innovative structure of the book, the challenges of balancing scientific research and emotional storytelling, and why graphic nonfiction can be such a powerful format for young readers. So, settle in because this is such a thoughtful and inspiring discussion. Here is my conversation with Danica and Mira. Mira and Danica, welcome to Reading in the Middle. How are you both today?
Great.
Good,
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here. And usually I would say, tell me about your book. But before we talk about the book, can each of you introduce yourselves and share what drew you to this project?
Yeah, I'm Danica Novgorodov. I am an artist, an illustrator, graphic novelist, writer sometimes, collaborator often. And I started working on this project a long time ago, many years ago. And I had the idea to make a graphic novel about nature and about climate and people's relationship with nature. And it changed a lot over the years. And Mira and I worked together to make this into something much bigger than I had originally expected. So I'll let Mira talk a little bit, and then I'm sure we'll discuss the book more.
Yeah. So I come from a totally different background of being a science journalist. So I'm usually doing long reported stories, feature stories, and trying to bring science to people in things about vultures and biodiversity and water quality and air pollution and climate change and all these different subjects. And so I've been thinking more and more about climate in my work because it's just intersectional with caring about or writing stories about biodiversity or about human relationship and human health in terms of climate. And so I was writing about that more and more, but I was kind of in between projects. And when I ran into Danica and heard she was struggling with like how to turn this into a story and like how to just really grapple with bringing the climate science to a younger audience, I was like, oh, that sounds like a really fun challenge. Like that's like, in some ways it's totally different than the work that I've done. And then in other ways, it's like exactly what I was ready to do because I had digested so much information, and it was really fun to figure out how to make it digestible to audiences of all ages.
Every world is possible feels so incredibly timely, but also hopeful. What was the moment when you both realized that this was a story that needed to be told?
Well, I attended the 2019 climate strike in New York City. I was living there at the time, and I had just had my second baby. So I went with my newborn to the giant climate protest. And I saw so much energy among young people, especially who were striking from school and carrying banners and posters and chanting and speaking in front of hundreds of thousands of people. And it was so exciting to see so much energy from the young climate movement activists. So I wanted to make this book to kind of convey their enthusiasm and their inspiration and share that with other people and with other young people as well. So I wanted it to be a pretty comprehensive book about climate change and what are all the the main factors behind climate change. But I also wanted it to be a human story that told, real people's life stories and drew people in with stories about people, because I think just reading about data especially can be very boring, but even just reading about nature, I think, can sometimes also be a little bit dry and boring. So I wanted it to be stories that really engaged people, and especially young people, to think about climate and why we should care.
Yeah, and that was like just such a fun storytelling challenge for me about like how to write, because I basically like wrote a manuscript before Danica did all this with hand watercolors. So like everything had to be done before she was going to like start all that intensive labor. And so it was really fun thinking about like the structure of it, of how to find the right people who could carry that story. And so what Danica and I decided to do was like find out who were the kids, because that amazing climate march that she went to was basically led by youth. And this was in the time of Greta Thunberg, but there was also like Parkland shootings had happened down in Florida. There was just youth were very engaged in trying to make their world better to grow up into. And so we were like, okay, let's find those kids. Like, let's find the kids who were up on stage and working behind the scenes. And so that was just kind of fun, like putting on my reporter's hat and doing like the investigative part to figure out like who was there, but who also was like quietly doing work behind the curtain, and reaching out to them and finding out whose stories felt most powerful and how we could have good diversity about what they were bringing to the story of youth climate action, and just being really like driven by this question of like what leads a young person to be so actively engaged at such a tender age on this issue of climate work. And that was like kind of the driving question of the story.
Yeah, because the title itself is powerful, right? And the book is framed around possibility rather than the fear. And I like that, and it's true to itself. And Mira, you, with your background in journalism, like you mentioned, it shines. I will tell you, it really shines throughout the book.
Thank you.
How did your experience as a reporter shape the way you approached these young activists and their stories?
Yeah, that was like it's kind of this fascinating subject because it feels so daunting. Like climate change just feels like so huge. But in some ways it's like really fundamentally simple. It's a very like physical chemical thing, like more carbon dioxide burned by oil and gas releases these molecules into the atmosphere, and they hold heat. Like if that part of it is like really simple, but then playing out like how they get released, why they get released, the big systems that we live in that just feel like they're unchangeable, but they do change and they have changed. I mean, 200 years ago, we were not living in an industrial society where everything we did was powered by fossil fuels. Most of human existence has not been this. So it was kind of like trying to recognize and bring down, like sometimes I've been talking about like this was a little bit like writing haikus. Like you're going to take these big things like environmental justice. There's like all these interludes throughout the book that are about climate science, religion, eco grief, and environmental justice. Like these are like big topics, but like how do we distill it down to like the things you need to understand? So you need to understand intersectionality. You need to understand that you can't tear apart this thing, even though it's like a physical thing, carbon dioxide making the air warmer, how the results of that play out in very different ways for very different communities in our country and around the world, about who is making the pollution and who is feeling the effects of that pollution. And so like trying to get into these big sort of complicated ideas, but distilling them down to something that is really clear to see. Like you can't separate gender if it's the girls going out and not going to school and collecting the firewood to help keep the fire burning and cook the food. So like you can't separate those things. And then that air pollution from that fire burning is bad for their human health, for women and girls who are around the stove, and also for the atmosphere where it's contributing carbon. So just trying to bring all those things in like really quickly, me in the manuscript, and then Danica could convey so much with the art.
And how did you build trust with young people featured in the book? Because climate change is such a large and complicated topic. How did you decide which stories, moments, and perspectives to focus on for young readers?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we reached out to I don't remember how many, maybe 10 or so. So some of it was just like who responded to us. It was early pandemic days, so people were kind of everybody was grappling with a whole world turned upside down at that point. So part of it was who was available and willing to talk with us. We were very clear we were writing a book, and so they had to be willing to want to share their story. And then it was just like hearing them tell their stories when we were like doing Zoom interviews with them. They just had really powerful stories. Like instantly, as a narrative journalist, instantly I could see the scenes they were talking about. Like Rebecca Sobnam is one of the youth, and one of her first really moments of climate awareness came when she was in Bangladesh, and it was just raining and raining and raining, and everything was flooding. And still her mom is like, you're still going to school. You're getting on your uncle's shoulders, and he's going to take you and your sister to school. And she is, being held by her uncle, walking, waist deep in water to go to school. Like it's an ordinary day. Like you're still, like this happens too often. You're going to school. Mm-hmm. And she, described looking over and being like, okay, I just like look up to my big sister so much. Like if I'll look at my big sister, and if my big sister isn't scared, then I don't have to be scared. And she's expecting her big sister's going to be all cool. And her sister looked terrified, and her uncle was scared. And she just took that in, like, this is really, really deep. And then she was connecting the dots and telling us stories about that her father had experienced flooding in Bangladesh. And so like she's thinking about intergenerational trauma and how these things can happen. And with extreme weather caused by climate change, these things can happen more frequently. And so like those stories, some of those stories, when they just told us the first time we heard them, right, Danica, we're just like, oh my God, it's so vivid. It's so beautiful. It's so personal. It's so powerful.
And Danica, your artwork gives the book so much movement and emotion. What was your visual approach going into the project?
Well, I think the visuals are kind of at the core of translating this information into something accessible and colorful and engaging, trying to make these stories that can be kind of heavy or full of information, making them accessible to people, to readers. So yeah, I really wanted it to be colorful and beautiful to look at so that it could be more easily digested. And the structure lends itself to a visual approach because we're telling these stories that have these interesting narratives, but then in between, we're kind of giving a little bit of background about climate change. And so I have to sprinkle in a few charts and, infographic type things, or like, images that show more of the sciencey stuff. But I think that can also be conveyed, it helps to kind of break that up with visuals. So that, yeah. And I've always worked in watercolor for my graphic novel project. So I definitely wanted to continue with that because it's a book that has a lot of nature in it. I think watercolor is just so beautiful for showing landscapes and nature and animals and stuff like that. So I definitely wanted to kind of continue with that visual approach to it.
Were there particular scenes or spreads that were challenging or especially meaningful for you to illustrate?
Oh, well, so there are a lot of crowd scenes because we do depict the climate strike and the big protests. So those, I mean, for me, even though, graphic novels are about people are the hardest for me to draw, and especially if it's a character that appears throughout the book and they have to look the same in each panel so that you can recognize who's who and make them distinct and easily recognizable. But those crowd scenes with like 100 people in them, oh my gosh, they took forever. They took a long time to create, and then I also had to color them. So it was just like little tiny brushes coloring in each little t-shirt and each little sign. So I would say those were the most challenging. The fun ones for me are like landscapes and kind of the bigger pages where you can make animals and trees and stuff. Those are kind of easier and more fun for me.
This takes me back to, 1990. There was it was like this resurgence of the Earth movement. And I remember as a teenager, I was celebrating Earth Day, and McDonald's sold like little tree samples that you could, plant. And I gave one to my grandmother, and she planted it in the backyard, and it's still there.
What? Oh, that's
and it's still there. And I'm saying this because young people, it's so great to hear that young people are protesting and they care about, the environment. And, it's because we're each generation is giving or leaving something to to the next generation. And when we're talking about the hole in the ozone layer, that sounds scary, right? And, you tell people, don't use paper towels, use a washcloth instead, or don't use hairspray or aerosol gas, or what have you. But I mention this because the book highlights, the youth voices in such a meaningful way. That's what I loved about this book. And this is for both of you, what did working on this project teach you about this generation of young people? I think that's what I was trying to say. It's going as far as.
Yeah, I mean, what I love is the shift away from, like you mentioned, fear earlier. And it is like when you become like climate aware, when you kind of like recognize that there is a problem and then you start educating yourself about it, it can be really hard. It can be like emotionally hard. It can also feel like, and there's a lot of like fear that can emerge out of that. But I think like the thing that was amazing that I got from really diving into the stories of these kids is like they are like the idea that you can shift that and like put it right on its head. Like instead of being scared about this terrible thing that's coming, instead you're like, I want to work towards the world that I do want to live in. Like I'm going to make the world that I want to live in. I'm not just going to be like again. And this again is like being for something instead of against something, instead of like fighting against climate change. Instead you're fighting for a better world that you want to actually grow up and inhabit and raise your own family in and be a part of. So I think that shift, even like Danica, actually the very beginning, we were calling it Another World is Possible because this comes from a climate strike protest chant, and it's Another World is Possible. And at one point, I think, Danica, you were the one who was like, shouldn't it be a better world as possible? I'm like, yeah, hell yeah. Yes,
I
that's
love
like
that.
exactly what it should be. Like it
Yes.
could be so that's I mean, I've definitely just gotten a lot of inspiration of like thinking about how to make the world we want to be in and watching how these kids are doing that. But Danica, what have you, I'm curious.
Well, one thing that really impresses me about this generation of climate activists is their awareness of how, I mean, you were talking about like, don't use hairspray and that kind of thing, which, and, I think we were all raised with like, you need to recycle, you need to turn the lights off. And like, all of that is important. But I think this generation recognizes the larger systemic problems that are not individual responsibilities so much as like corporations that are causing so much damage and the government that has so much more leverage than an individual to make larger change. And they really see that kind of interconnectedness between, what's happening on a systemic level and taking the blame off of each individual and onto like really trying to shift the conversation through pushing the people who have more power to act better and to create a better world. I think that was really impressive. Like they see kind of the larger picture in a way that I don't think I did when I was that age.
Yeah, we highlight that with Shia Bastida is another one of the youth, and she was getting more and more concerned, having experienced flooding in her home in Mexico, and then she moves to New York City, and she saw the lasting effects of Hurricane Sandy there, and she's like, "Oh my God, this is all the same story." And then she's like, "I'm going to join the environmental club," and then everybody's like, "I'm not using straws." Done. And she's like, wait a second, showing them the carbon majors report that shows that, it's only a limited number of corporations that are responsible for most of the emissions. And so it's like these systemic things. So yeah, they get that. I totally didn't get that at their age. But they get it.
Yeah, I didn't either. And that's what I was saying, that was that was like 36 years ago. And I thought it was as simple as that, not knowing the deeper aspects of it. And you're right, with the corporations. And I didn't look at it like that. I didn't see it. I didn't do any heavy investigating about it. I just thought, okay, Jones, it's not, I'm helping save the environment. No, it's deeper than that. And one of the strongest themes in the book is that, activists can look different for everyone. Why was that important to include? Because this book explores environmental justice and inequality alongside climate change as well. And I believe the book connects those conversations as well. So why was it important to include that?
Yeah, I mean, activism, it's kind of interesting because activism is such a visual means of showing deep concern about an issue. And so we do, we don't want to do too much of a spoiler alert, but we like kind of end the book of like saying activism is like one little tiny part that is like super great for Instagram. Like so many great pictures. There's puppets, there's signs, there's music, there's color. There's like, a million little people that you have to paint t-shirt by t-shirt. But it is just like the tip of the iceberg. And a lot of the work of activism does not look like that. It's like, it's hard and it's slow and it's ongoing and it's building community and it's working on a local level and regional level and all these different, it's really tough. It's a slog and it's ongoing and it never really ends because every victory just means that you've protected whatever you're working on right then, and you have to keep working and you keep carrying the torch. And we talk about how important it is to take care of yourself, to take care of each other, to pace yourself, because a lot of these fights are big ones and long ones and ongoing. I just wrote a piece for Time that was talking about that we're kind of now into like generation 2 or even 3 of climate activists. Shia's parents are both climate activists. They met in 1992, in Rio de Janeiro for the Earth Summit. Like this fight has been going on for a long time. Yeah. And so like really trying to recognize that you do have to pace yourself and that activism can look like a lot of different things. It is not just that big protest, which has in our country now especially become a lot harder and more dangerous, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are just so many different people who have different interests and different talents. And at this point in the climate struggle, we need to come at the issue from so many different angles to make things move in a better direction. We need to take legal action. We need to have scientific advances in technology. We need to, engage with politics. We need to, have artists involved in making it a visual issue. There's so many different ways you can come into it. So we wanted this book to inspire people to, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what their talents are or their interests, to know that there is a spot for everyone in this movement.
Did the collaboration between the two of you evolve over time? What did the creative process look like behind the scenes?
Yeah, we started working together in 2020 when we ran into each other at a book event at a friend's book release party. And I had been kind of trying to work on this book for a year or two already. I had been thinking about it and making outlines and drawing little sketches, and but really kind of struggling because I don't have that science background and that journalism background that Mira has. So I was really eager to find a collaborator. And so I got in touch with Mira, and then we ran into each other and really started talking about it. And at that point, I think Mira, like she said, she had an opening in her schedule and was interested in collaborating with me. So that was really exciting to work with her and to get her expertise on this project, because I think it would have taken me 10 years to do the proper research to get the book going. And I felt like it was such an urgent project that I didn't want to do 10 years of research. I just wanted to start drawing. So Mira started off with working on the script and bringing that idea of using that climate protest as like the focal point for the story. And Mira started reaching out to the activists, and then we interviewed them together on Zoom. And it took a while to get the script together, and then it was kind of in legal, like, publisher purgatory for a long time, just waiting for the legal team to approve it. And once that had all kind of gone through, I started making thumbnail sketches, which are just very quick sketches to map out the entire book, like what goes on which page and which panel and who's saying what where, what are the camera angles. And then I ended up drawing the black and white line work on an iPad, so digitally, which kind of expedited the process a little for me rather than drawing that on paper. But then I did print it all out, and I did the watercolor by hand with real paint, and put that together in Photoshop, and the process had a lot of small steps, but after 200 pages, you kind of get that process down. And yeah, anything to add, Mira, about that process?
No, but it was really enjoyable for me too. I mean, Danica, you had said like a lot of books that you have illustrated, not the ones you've written, but that you've illustrated for other people, there wasn't as much interaction. And I just loved how we were constantly back and forth, even when, she was when I was on my writing stages, we're constantly checking in. And like as a journalist, I have like the wonderful go out and talk to strangers part of the reporting out in the field, which I just love. But then after that, you're just kind of by yourself. Like you're checking in with your editor a little bit, but you're all the little nuts you need to crack. You kind of got to figure them out on your own. And it was just so great having like every time I was getting stuck on things, I would run it by Danica. And so much of the book is like teaching people along the way of the story. And so like Danica was like the perfect audience because she was trying to learn this stuff. And sometimes she'd be like, oh, wait, Mira, no, this is way too complicated. Like you got to reel this back in. Or if I was writing too long a thing that was going to take her forever to paint, she's also like, reel it in. But it was nice. It was like I was thinking visually. So I would have ideas in my mind, and I would drop in like, links to images like, hey, I could imagine something like this. But then she would just run with it, and it would become something totally wonderful. It was like just kind of our two little superpowers working together.
Yeah, it was a very cool collaborative process. Like I haven't worked so closely with another artist or writer before. And so it was, we ended up using the little device of having ourselves as these sort of mini characters going back and forth, kind of like a radio interview where I would be kind of like the devil's advocate and be like, but wait a minute, Mira, can you tell me more about X, Y, and Z? And I think I was kind of the perfect person to play that role because, like Mira said, I was trying to learn about climate change, and I have about, like maybe a high schooler's understanding of the science. So that being our audience, I would be like, hold on, like I need this broken down into like much clearer, like smaller steps. And so I think the writing process and the editing process was really fun for both of us.
Your young readers today, they're carrying like a lot of anxiety about the future. What conversations do you both hope this book sparks in classrooms, libraries, and homes?
Yeah, one is that we do tackle the grief part of it very directly. We wanted to include that just because it's just to recognize the eco grief that people experience, learning about how much their world is changing and what is at stake and what's being threatened and what's being lost. But we basically, did you want us to read from anything?
I would love that. Yes.
Because we could read a couple pages from that section and then talk about the solutions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah? Please.
Should we do that?
Sure.
Yeah, there's been one part that we've been reading that give a little of the.
Yeah, so this comes right after a section about Jamie, who says that she got involved with climate activism because she was very terrified and grieving about, she was living through the effects of wildfires on the West Coast near her home. And she was feeling very depressed and paralyzed about the climate situation. So then I come in and I say, the more I learned about climate change, the more I felt like Jamie. Most of my writing turned into long journal entries about how much anxiety I was feeling. I didn't have a clue how to channel my anger and fear. And then there's a picture of me raising my fist to an airplane saying, "Don't you know you're killing the honeybees with your carbon?" As I learned how enormous the climate crisis was, how it was already happening now, and how interconnected it is to so many other issues like racial justice, poverty, political corruption, education, violence, migration, the idea for this book was born. But the more I learned, the more I got really freaked out.
Meanwhile, I had recently finished writing a book about environmental issues in India. And this was me sitting at my computer at Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I realized that every single issue I cared and wrote about, wild animals and old trees, healthy food and clean water, the lives of marginalized people struggling to survive, all threatened to get so much worse because of climate change. Each new story I'd work on would teach me more about how bad things were getting.
I was drawing and drawing.
And I was reporting and writing.
But too often it didn't feel like it was enough.
We weren't alone. And then that leads into a whole interlude about what to do about ecological grief or eco-anxiety. And so we explore that, and we explore like biodiversity loss being part of that equation. And then so we talk about trees and animals and birds. And then we like lead into the last part of that section. Know that you're not alone in how you feel. Seek out help and find your community.
Yes, and remember that sometimes the best antidote to despair is to get up and act.
Because hope is not a noun, an object you either have or lack.
Hope is a verb, an ongoing process of action as you and others by your side work toward creating the world you want to live in. Not just fighting against, but fighting for. There's no moment when the work is done, but in doing the work together, that better world emerges.
And then we have a quote from author Rebecca Solnit. Hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. It is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. And then we end with the moment you want to curl up in a fetal position and hide could be just the moment to stand up and then we lead back into Jamie's story.
Thank you.
And how she takes action in so many different ways.
Yeah. And that's really like, so, even though there's like some dark things that are being conveyed in the book and through the stories of what the youth experienced in their own lives, we really end with a whole bunch of ways that people can act. And so there's solutions are, the really hopeful thing is that like, we know exactly what needs to be done. We need to stop burning fossil fuels and create systems that work better for people and the places they live. So we know that. And then there's all these forces that are making that hard to do. But it's not like we're waiting for some magic invention to come along. Like we actually have all the tools at our disposal right now. And so the solutions section at the end gets into everything from like, reimagining land use and big things to like, don't waste food because that's embodied energy. And so like, it can be really simple things that people can do like today. And also hopefully for a young audience that we're planting seeds where somebody who wants to become a civil engineer maybe starts thinking about how cities could be redesigned to be more easy to get around and more human centered. And so we have all of those things, and there's tons of resources at the back of the back of the book. And then on our website, abetterworldthebook.org, there is a whole bunch of resources there that we'll keep updating. So like there's just so many rabbit holes that people can go run down and explore how they want to join the work.
And positive rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And
good rabbit holes.
Rabbit holes. Yes, good rabbit holes.
Not the TikTok rabbit holes.
No. Very, very good ones. And so Danica and Mira, this is what we call our lightning round portion of the interview, where I'll ask you both questions, and you it won't be separate, it's just the same, and then you can give me your answer. But when I say lightning round, it doesn't mean like, it's just whatever you think of from the top of your head. You just give it.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What was a favorite book from your own middle school years?
Oh, I loved Hatchet and My Side of the Mountain, like books about kids getting lost in the wilderness.
Carrie Paulson.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was really into Roald Dahl. All those like fantastical stories of James and the Giant Peach and all the I loved Roald Dahl, and he's so weird.
What's one thing giving you hope right now?
I focus a lot on energy. I mean, as a journalist, I'm writing a lot about like solar and wind and everything. And like, if we're in the US, it just feels like, oh my gosh, we're going on the wrong direction on decarbonizing the energy system. But everywhere else in the world is racing in the other direction. And that is giving me hope. There are places like India and China that are huge carbon emitters that are plateauing and decreasing their carbon emissions as they like really shift their energy systems. And there's places like Africa where they're just leapfrogging, and places that were really people needed energy, they're just skipping going to fossil fuels and they're going straight to solar, and they are getting political freedom. They're not being dependent on the few countries in the world who control all these resources. So that's giving me hope that there's change happening, even as it right here in our country right now. It can feel like it's not happening, but things are happening in many places in the world, and quite quickly. That's giving me hope.
I guess I'll go in Mira went in the international direction. I guess I'll go in the very local direction, which is that, just I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and even though Kentucky is, going kind of backwards in terms of policy and regulation and stuff, there's still people who are just working so hard on a very local level to get little things done and little things changed, and, fighting against all the corporations that are using too much energy, and they're really working hard. So that's nice to see on a local level.
Nice. What's something surprising you both learned while creating this book?
I think I was surprised by how like what Mira mentioned, how long we've known about all these solutions, and how we knew about wind and solar energy since the 1800s, and conversely, how we knew about the effects of carbon dioxide and on global warming so long ago. And so I was really surprised by how just the timeline of of our work on this topic.
Yeah, I feel like that's the same answer for me. Like we did this actual like chronology timeline where we put it all together. Like, what did we know when about both science and then things like, yeah, how to make electricity from wind and solar. And then when did fossil fuel companies start like really ramping up their disinformation campaigns to make us like question all the things that we knew that Eunice Newton Foote knew in the 1800s about more carbon dioxide means more warming. And so like, yeah, just laying that out in that timeline that I know was a big pain in the butt for but it really is like stories within stories. And I learned so much myself just putting all those pieces together.
And then my last question is, what are you both currently reading?
I've had so little time to read any like fun books, but I've been traveling a lot. So I've been listening to Karen Desai's The Loneliness of Sunny and Sonia, which is this really long novel. And I've been really, really enjoying that. She's an incredibly descriptive writer, and it is about Indians in America. And my father's from India. So it really captures like the most wonderful and the most terrible things of both of our places and what it means to be an immigrant and a person kind of between places. So that's what I'm reading right now. That's been my pleasure.
Yeah.
That's cool. I just bought that book, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh,
so
nice.
I'm excited.
Oh, nice.
I just finished a graphic novel called Feeding Ghosts by Tessa Hulls, which is about her mother and grandmother who came from China and their journey through communist China and a lot of trauma and mental health and her journey to becoming an artist and a writer. So it was really powerful.
Wow, that's gonna be on my TBR list and my listening to.
Yeah, she won a Pulitzer. Didn't she win a Pulitzer for that? Like first book,
big.
first
I
something.
can't remember. Yeah, it's
National
pretty
Book Award or
impressive.
something. She just like, yeah, I have it right here.
Yeah.
It's so good.
There
Oh,
you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pulitzer.
Yeah.
Impressive.
Yeah, totally impressive.
And it was interesting for me because my grandmother is from China and my dad was born there, and they left 10 years earlier, and it just made me realize how much of that trauma they avoided by leaving 10 years earlier than her mother and grandmother left.
That's wild.
After creating a better world as possible, what gives both of you hope, for the future? What gives you both hope?
Well, I have two daughters. They're 6 and 8, and seeing their generation come up being very aware of climate issues and of taking care of the environment and that idea of stewardship and of caring for nature and the plants and the animals, and as well as the human species, that really gives me hope. And I love, talking. I did a school visit recently to my daughter's school and talked to just like, I don't know, maybe 100 or 200 little kids. It was really great. And when I said, who knows, what are some solutions to climate change? And they just had so many ideas. And so that was really encouraging.
Yeah, it's been so much fun, like bringing this book into the world. Like it was fun, the collaborative process, Danica, with just working with you for so long, but then just this whole new stage of bringing it out into the world. And yeah, it's just amazing. Like I just did an event last night in Rhode Island at the Barrington Land Trust. And so they're supporting like all these youth climate kids who are doing like all this different stuff through the land trust there in town. And they're all, there was a half dozen of them in the audience who were like going off to college, and they're going to college thinking like, how am I going to like make a life that I can keep doing this work? And that gives me so much hope, is that people are like, not like, oh, I'm going to find a job and then on the weekends I'll recycle. Like, no, they're like thinking again holistically in this whole big way about like how to really do the work that needs to be done.
Well, Mira and Danica, I want to thank you both so much for being on Reading in the Middle. Listeners, You gotta read A Better World is Possible because it is, and you will enjoy it. Educators, librarians, it's timely. It's what we need right now, and we will enjoy it. So both of you, thank you for your encouragement and for creating this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's so great to talk to you.
Yeah, really nice conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again, Danica, Novgorodoff, and Mira, Subramanian, for joining me on Reading in the Middle to discuss A Better World is Possible. Yes, it is. Oh my goodness. I really appreciate hearing about the collaboration behind this project and also the thoughtful way they combine journalism, climate science, visual storytelling, and youth activism into the book. It feels urgent, honest, and helpful all at once. What stayed with me most after reading this book is the reminder that climate conversations are ultimately about people, communities, and the future young people always inherent. Through the stories of 4 youth activists, A Better World is Possible explores not only the realities of climate change, but also the power of collective action and also hope. I also loved hearing about how intentional Danica and Mira were in balancing scientific research with emotional storytelling and creating a graphic nonfiction experience that trusts young readers with complexity while still leaving room for optimism and action. This is the kind of book that sparks important conversations long after the final page, and I know it will resonate with readers, educators, librarians, and families alike. As always, listeners, thank you so much for listening to Reading in the Middle. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow, share, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And continue supporting books and creators who encourage young readers to think critically, stay curious, and imagine new possibilities for the future. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep believing that a better world is really possible.